Hi, this is Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you for HIT 445 Quality Management. And we are now on week 8. This is the second video lecture for week 8. It's on chapter 19, all about managing the human side of change. If you want to follow along in your book, we are on page 379. Our learning objectives, at least according to the book, are to apply change management techniques to implement performance improvements, compare and contrast the 3 phases of change, and identify key steps in change management. So what are the 3 phases of change that they want to talk to us about? This is on page 380. Lewin's 3 phases of change are unfreezing, which is letting go of the old way, moving, which means making the change, and freezing, establishing stability again, where the change becomes the new normal. These 3 phases have also been referred to as ending, transition, and beginning. Ending is characterized by grief and letting go. Ending is, I think that's a really good way of putting it. A lot of times our grief or our frustration, our anger, that whole process that we work through can be because something has changed. And we may not have wanted it to, may not have thought it needed to change, may not have been comfortable with the change. The change may have been forced on us, sort of like COVID. Or the change may be something that was inevitable, something we just simply had to face because it was a natural part. For instance, those with children, it may be them going off to kindergarten, or it may be them going off to college, or it may be them getting married, starting a family, moving away. Those are things that would naturally occur in our lives, and sometimes there's some mixed feelings there. Same thing in the professional environment, in the organizational space. Sometimes there's going to be a new computer system, a new EHR coming into being. Whether you were a part of that decision making or not, you're going to have to face, it's going to be an ending of what you're used to, what you're comfortable with, what you like, what you know, and it's going to be something different. And so one of the things I really want to encourage you in is to understand that grief is perfectly normal, and that you are going to process it differently than others. Each one of us processes it a little bit differently. Yes, we may go through the stages of grief that was originally published by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and it had to do with death and dying, but in the same sense, that can be beyond an individual dying. It can be into a dream, a hope, a plan, an expectation, all those things. However we process it, though, in the work environment, we have to find a way to still be positive and productive. And that's where the challenge is, not only for us as individuals, but if we are leading others, we have to help them through these stages of change. And that means meeting them where they're at and encouraging them to move through those stages or manage those stages. There may be times when people fall backwards into an earlier stage of grief, when everyone else might be moving into the transition phase, or maybe even some people are in the beginning phase, and you still have a handful of people who are still struggling with ending. How do you manage that? How do you encourage them? How do you help them move along? There are a variety of ways that you can do that, but the point here is that we all will face these stages whenever change comes into our lives. As professionals, we need to manage that very carefully in the work environment, and to some degree at home too, because it's hard on others in our lives, particularly those who love us and know us the most, if we lash out when we're going through some of these things. So just encourage you as you go through these to keep those things in mind. And again, this kind of dovetails with the Strengths Finder information that I wanted you to be looking at this week. Because as you know yourself and how you handle these things and the good ways that you do that, or maybe the not so good ways that you do that, it can help you in sharing with those around you some of the things that you do struggle with and the ways that they can encourage you. For instance, with strengths, one of the strengths is positivity. And if you know of a colleague or a family member who is characterized by positivity, when you're going through this, you can seek them out for encouragement. Seek them out to help you find the positives in what you're going through. Even though you can't see it or can't feel it, um, appreciating their strength in that area and borrowing a bit of it can be very helpful. Um, so that's one way that you can think about that. So ending is characterized by grief, and in order to move into transition, you have to let go. Even if you don't want to, you have to let go. And sometimes it may feel like when you're working with other people that you're literally prying their fingers off of whatever it is that needs to be let go. You still need to be kind, compassionate, although you may need to be firm. Transition. This next phase is characterized by confusion and creativity. The confusion is, I'm not sure what's going on. Everything's changing around me. It can also be creativity of, wow, there might be some options to really make this work for us. That we might have had some frustrations with the old system. And now we have the opportunity to maybe set up the new system or learn how to use the new system to move beyond those frustrations. So transition is that middle stage, that uncomfortable stage. It's and you may find yourself falling backwards into grief and having to let go more than once before you move from transition to beginning. That is, again, perfectly normal. We all handle things differently. We just need to know what these phases are and the expectation that our organizations and really our families are expecting us to move through those at some point. When it comes to grieving for an individual, going through these stages, you can't necessarily put a time frame on. Um, a sudden loss of a family member ending may take a lot longer versus losing someone slowly over a long period of time where you're going through that grieving process and that letting go process throughout that very long extended illness. So it might make it easier to transition into transition. Whereas, when you lose someone immediately and you don't have a chance to say goodbye and there's all that wrapped into it, it may take quite a while to move from ending to transition, and that's perfectly normal. Um, and then transition moves eventually into beginning, and that's where there's acceptance and hope for the future. There's, okay, I know we're never going to be able to go back. I understand where we're at now. I'm starting to learn this new system, and it's getting easier for me to use, and um, and I can see some good things in it. That's beginning. Beginning might also be where you start reaching out to others. That maybe in ending and transition, you isolated yourself a bit, but now with beginning, you're reaching out again and starting to settle back in and, excuse me, reestablishing relationships and processes and activities and things that you might have had before a change ever came into your life or into my life. I will tell you that I see these stages in my life all the time. Recently, the college put on a really great presentation about grief and grieving. And even though I have not lost anyone in my life, at times I have felt the grieving process and these stages of change when things have not happened the way that I'd planned for them. that I had some plans and they were completely dashed. I had some hopes and those came to nothing. Or I watched them being destroyed by outside things that I couldn't control. And I'm not talking about anything politics or anything like that, lest you think that. No, I'm not. I'm not going there. Uh, Trying to give you an example without getting too personal. I guess here's one I can give you. You know, back in the summer, my husband and I bought a house that was built in 1894. 1894. And it's a beautiful old Victorian, Queen Anne Victorian, but it needs an enormous amount of work. And we knew that when we bought it, but I don't think we realized quite how much work it was going to take. There were things that we thought were in place that weren't. For instance, the electrical systems. And we were ready to get busy on quite a bit of renovation when we realized that the electrical system really wasn't what it needed to be in order for us to do renovations. And so it didn't make sense for us to do the renovations, replaster in some areas, put up drywall in others, do painting, refurbish the floors and things like that, because with the electrical, we're going to have to run wires through walls, we're going to have to punch holes in walls, we're going to have to put up new sub panels and all those types of things. And so for me, realizing that my hopes of advancement with renovating the house and making it look the way that I wanted it to look was going to be set back at least a year, maybe two, was really difficult for me, and I really struggled with it, and was very angry and frustrated and all of that, and went through these phases. But now that we're getting ready to start on the electrical work, we've got some things laid out. We know a little bit more about what we're doing, and we've got some time frames and things in place. Yeah, it's going to work out. It's not going to be what I thought it was going to be. It's not going to be on my time frame. It may not turn out to be quite what I've wanted or hoped or what have you, but somehow it will work out. And so that is my example from a personal perspective of dealing with change. And just reminding myself that my frustration and anger isn't going to help my husband and kids, and helping them move through the changes as well. That by pushing back the renovations, it means that my daughter's room is not going to be done as soon as she would have liked, and helping her deal with that frustration and disappointment. So there are all those things. So if you go into leadership and management, know that you not only have to manage yourself, but then you have to be able to manage others. You have to be able to help them move through these stages, and find their way, because it's very difficult and challenging. So enough of that. Moving on. So the accelerators for change. What are the steps and how does this work? This is figure 19.2 on page 382. The first thing when you're looking at change is you need to create a sense of urgency. If there's no sense of urgency, then why do it? Why even press forward? Why have a time frame if it's not urgent? Well, what makes it urgent? Why does it need to be urgent? I'm going to go fall back on my house example. Our sense of urgency is that we found that we have cloth covered wire from the 1940s in some areas. The sense of urgency is that in the kitchen, the way that they've wired the kitchen, I can't use the dishwasher and the microwave and the stove all at the same time without tripping a breaker. So there's a sense of urgency for us, and we also are using some extension cords, which probably also is a fire hazard in this house that is full of wood and plaster. So our sense of urgency is safety. Safety of our kids, safety of our cats, the investment we've made in this house, and all of that. So sense of urgency, we need to get it done. Build a guiding coalition. You need to pull people together who have a stake in this, who have an investment, who have skin in the game, so to speak, that they need this change to benefit them. So, our coalition obviously is the family. My daughter wants her room renovated. We can't renovate it until we get the sub panel box in and the wiring done and all of that. And she's frustrated because she wants to have friends over, but her room is not really in a condition that she can enjoy friends coming over and playing. And so, that's her stake in all of this. She wants to be able to invite friends over and not be concerned about how it looks or how it feels. And then, of course, we all, my husband has his perspective, I have my perspective, my son has his perspective. So, form a strategic vision and initiatives. That's the next step. You got to know where you're going and what you're going to achieve. I mean, once you have your sense of urgency and you have everybody in place that needs to be a part of the team to give input and to work on the process and make it happen, then you got to say, okay, what are we really aiming for here? What's our strategic vision and what initiatives are we going to achieve by this change? So you can imagine with the electrical in the house what our strategic vision is and what many of our initiatives are. Step 4 is enlist a volunteer army. Now this one's a little bit more challenging for us, but I'll give you an example. My husband has 2 older brothers, and both of them are engineers. One is an electrical engineer, and so we have been twisting his arm and twisting his ear to help us figure out the electrical. But a volunteer army with a change in an organization can be frontline staff that are currently struggling with issues that this change might remedy. It can be patients who are interested in improved outcomes. It can be senior leaders, it can be providers, it can be anyone, but you've got to have a big group of volunteers that can actually help carry this out. Some of it says volunteer army, some may be voluntary and others may be a bit more involuntary, but based on their role in the organization, they're stuck having to help. But you want to hopefully get them on board when they see your strategic vision and initiatives, that they get excited about being a part of this change and the good that it can do for everyone. Step 5, enable action by removing barriers. Okay, so in order to make the change happen, you have to identify what barriers are there and remove them. That can be people that are fighting the change. It can be processes that will get in the middle of that change. It can be software. It can be it can even be physical. You may find that if you're doing something in terms of renovations at an organization, it may be taking down a literal wall. It may be bringing 2 departments together to work together that have never worked together and hate each other for whatever reason. When I first went to work for the healthcare organization that I worked for in North Carolina, they were 2 acute care hospitals that were 8 miles apart, and their communities had active dislike for each other. Their medical staffs had active dislike for each other. Their employees had active dislike for each other. And we had to find a way to bring them together because the healthcare system brought those 2 acute care hospitals together as one healthcare organization. And so suddenly we had one medical record department between the 2 hospitals, not 2. And we had to move staff back and forth. And we had physicians who needed to be able to practice at both places and how we had to do that. So it's removing barriers. Here at the house, we've had to get permits, we've had to get the equipment, we've had to get the wiring, we've had to get the boxes, the sub panel boxes, we've had to identify where to put those. The fact that we're going to lose a little bit of floor space in my daughter's room because one of the sub boxes has to go in there. and we'll be running wires up into the attic, and the attic doesn't have a real permanent floor to it, so we're having to identify what we're going to do with that to make it more accessible and secure and safe and environmentally controlled so that it doesn't get too hot up there in the summers or too cold in the winter. So we're looking at barriers. What do we have to remove? Where are we going to be putting holes in the floor? Where will we be running wire? Will we need to cover it eventually with some molding or some floorboards, different or baseboards, not floorboards, but baseboards. So there's all these things that we're having to do to figure out what barriers do we need to remove in order to enable us to take action, to complete our initiatives and fulfill our strategic vision. Step 6 is generate short-term wins. This is where you start putting things into place and you realize, hey, this is working out great. We're seeing some benefits here. Everyone's starting to feel positive because they're seeing things come together. It's no longer a plan on paper, but it's actually happening. We're not quite there with the house yet. We'll see when we get there. But it has to be within the next 6 months because that's all the permits last for. And at the end of the 6 months, someone from the city or the county will be coming out to look at our progress. So we'll be generating some short-term wins here soon, I hope. All right, step 7, sustain acceleration. This is where, okay, you've got some short-term wins under your belt, but you've got to pick up the pace because you've got to get this in place. You've got to make your change happen and become a permanent change. So sustaining acceleration, looking at, again, are you removing barriers? Are you getting more wins? Are you getting closer to fulfilling all your initiatives instead of a handful? Is that strategic vision very close to being complete? And then step 8 is the actual change itself is now fulfilled. It's in place. It is now the new normal. So those are the 8 steps. Please make sure that you are very familiar with Lewin's three phases of change. These unfreezing, moving, freezing that equal ending, transition, and beginning. Make sure you know what they are and how they work. And these 8 accelerators for change. Make sure you know those. Please, please, please. All right, so that is it for chapter 19. This is probably the last lecture video I'm going to do for this class because the rest of the material is pretty much online. Really excited about all of you heading out for your PPEs this spring and really excited about all that you're doing. Want to say thank you so much for coming along on the journey with me for quality management. I am so pleased that you all found Quint's book helpful. It's something that I read for work a number of years ago, and I had the opportunity to actually see Quint Studer in person. The organization that I work for brought him in for a couple of day sessions for their leadership team, and so I had the chance to meet him and listen to him live, and he told additional stories that are not in the book. And then, of course, we studied his book. And I have always felt that that book has so much in it. Only wish every healthcare organization was mandated to read that and put that into place because I think things would be so very different for patients, providers, and employees. But anyway, long story short, thank you so much. And I know we'll be in touch talking in some of your other classes before you graduate. But I'm so very proud of all of you. Take care.